Let's start extracting markup of individual elements within the footer into its own components. Let's start with social links, and then we'll also extract copyright text. I'm going to cut the whole markup of social links and use social component. Of course, we have to create file called social.blade.php inside components folder and paste the markup of social links in here. And then I'm also going to do the same with the copyright text. Let's extract it from here, use copyright component, and create the file for this component within components folder and paste the markup. So we also can extract the following code, which is navigation within the footer. But in this case, we're going to do it in a little bit different way. In order to group all the components that belong to the footer, we're going to group them into a separate folder called footer within components folder. So first of all, let's use the following notation. I'm going to extract footer navigation markup into nav component that will be stored inside footer folder. And this is one of the Blade conventions when we firstly specify folder name and then dot followed by the component name that is stored inside that folder. And as you can see, when I use Laravel IDEA plugin to quickly create this view, it will properly create folder called footer and put their file with the name now.blade.php. And right here I'm going to put markup for the footer navigation. So whenever Blade sees such notation where the dot is used, it will treat everything that comes before the dot as a folder name and everything that comes after as a file name. So let's just group all footer components and move them inside footer folder. In here I'll use the same notation with dot to indicate that all these components will be stored within footer folder. And of course, let's not forget and move these components into footer folder. And do the same with the copyright component. I actually forgot to move array with navigation items from footer component into nav component, so let's do it right now. Let's cut this content and paste it into nav.blade.php, because in this component we're using that items variable to iterate over navigation items and show individual nav items on the page. Before moving any further, let's just take a look in the browser and make sure that the footer is shown properly. And now, since we grouped all components that belong to the footer within one folder, why don't we just move the footer component itself into footer folder. First of all, let's move this footer component into footer folder. And then I'm going to rename this component to be called index. This is another Blade convention which allows us to use footer component as is, so we don't have to make any changes to this line. Blade is basically going to look for the file called index within the footer folder. So after making this change, we might see the following issue in the browser, and that means that we have to recompile Blade views. To do so, we just have to clear the view cache. So let's switch back to the terminal and run the following command: php artisan view :clear. And this way, on the next page request, all Blade views will be recompiled. And we are seeing that this issue is fixed now. And as for the copyright text, currently we use paragraph for this element, but maybe it will be more appropriate to use span element. So let's get back to copyright.blade.php and change implementation a little bit. So let's replace paragraph with span element and center it differently. Let's cut this text center class from here and use it on the parent element instead, because now we are centering all child elements of this element, which is only one element, span with the copyright text. And this is looking good. Let's also extract individual nav items inside the footer into its own component. I'm gonna take this whole markup, create the following component with the name nav item inside the footer folder. and then paste that markup in here. And of course we have to accept the page address from outside. So as we'll already know, in order to pass some attributes into component and accept them on some element, we have to use special variable called attributes. And now all we have to do is to actually pass the href variable as an href attribute, as well as pass page name as a label for the navigation item. And finally, the last thing we're going to do in this lesson is to actually group a couple of components under the same folder. I'm talking about nav and nav item components that are located inside the header. Firstly, let's move nav item component into the nav folder. We're also using notation with a dot in here, because nav item will be stored under nav folder. We will move this nav item component into nav folder and change its name. Let's call it just item, because it is already assumed that this is a nav item since it is stored under nav folder. And finally, we'll also have to move nav component into nav folder. But according to the conventions, if we will name this file index, then we'll be able to reference nav component by its name, instead of having to specify full notation such as folder name, dot followed by component name. And once again, if we'll encounter the following problem, it is related to cached views. So we need blade templates to be recompiled. And to do so, we just need to clear the view cache. Let's run PHP artisan view clear. And eventually everything is looking as we need to.